Shri Ganesha Sharada Gurubhyo Namaha Agajanana Padmarkam Gajananam Aharnisham Anekadam Tam Bhaktanam Ekadantam Upasmahe. Welcome to all for this session on Ganesha Purana to the special chapter 46, in which Ganesha told his Sahasranama to Shankara while giving the boon to him. It was in the past Shankara had lost the battle to while fighting against Demon Tripura. Demon Tripura overpowered on the Devas, and finally Shankara retired from the warfield and he went into a cave. Behind him, all the demigods and other gods, Kartikeya and others, they went inside the same cave. Meanwhile, Tripura searched for Shiva and then finally went to Kailasa, took the Chintamani Vinayaka with him, and fled and left for his city. Meanwhile, Narada visited Shankara and told him that he did not worship Gajanana in the beginning, as he told in the past that whenever we do anything new, any new work, whenever we take up any work, before in the beginning we need to worship Gajanana properly. So Shankara remembered the single syllable and the six syllable mantra, and by reciting that for years of austerity, he could able to get the vision of Ganesha. And Ganesha at that time, for the sake of the human world, he told about the Sahasranama, 1000 names of Gajanana, so that with that anybody can get what they desire. Rasa asked the question to Brahma, how did Ganesha specify those 1000 names? Concerned as you are about the welfare of beings, welfare of the human beings, tell me how it was given to Shiva. Brahma continued the story. Previously, that god had been obsessed with achieving the destruction of the triple city. Ganesha was concerned that Shiva should destroy those triple city so that the Brahman Tripura will be burnt into ashes. But because he did not worship Ganesha, there arose a veritable mass of obstacles. Because in the beginning, when Shiva was going for a fight with the Brahman Tripura, he just remembered Ganesha and he was much more bothered about how he can kill kill Demon Tripura. So, because of that reason, he forgot to properly worship Gajanana, and that is why he faced with several obstacles, and finally he met with the defeat. Yet, after he had concentrated firmly in his mind, he saw Vignakarana, and when he had devotedly worshipped Mahaganapati, according to the rite, according to the rituals, he asked the undefeatable God the way to allay the obstacles. Mahaganapati was completely gratified by Shambhu's worship, and to him he then recited his own 1000 names, which gives results for all desires and is the special allayer of all obstacles. And that will ward off by reciting those 1000 names in while doing or in the beginning of any work. One can ward off all the obstacles that would come in the way of that work. Of this mantra, which is a garland consisting of 1000 names of the illustrious Mahaganapati, Ganesha is the seed, Mahaganapati is the deity. You know, in the beginning of every mantra in our culture, we mention who is basically created that. The one who created that mantra or one who got that mantra. Here Ganesha himself is the seed who created this mantra. And for this mantra, Mahaganapati, that is, he himself is a deity, and the chandas, there are varieties of meters in which it has been created, and hum is the seed syllable, the introductory or the seed syllable. Trunk, that is the tusk, the chunk of Ganesha. Tunda. That itself is the power word. Tundam iti Shaktihi. Ham iti Bijam. Tundam iti Shaktihi. Mahaganapati iti Devata. Ganesha iti Rishihi. And Swaha is the wed syllable. Swaha is the Kilaka. Its purpose in a recitation is to please Mahaganapati, who is a doorway to the removal of all obstacles. Mahaganapati went on narrating those 1,000 names. He is the leader of the entire army of Shiva, Pramathagana. So he is the lord of them, and he wander along with those people, and he is the Mahaganadhipati, and he has a single tongue, and he has a curved tongue. He has elephant's face, who has a great belly, who has a pendulous navel, who is smoke colored, who is huge, who is the leader of all those Pramathaganas, whose face is good, whose face is bad. These are basically this is the explanation of the names that comes in that Sahasranama. So I'm giving the explanation, whereas for the original namas, the names, you can look into that Sahasranama. Who is intelligent, who is king of obstacles, who destroys evil, who is ferocious, delightful, joyful, the delight of the gods, who is excessively proud, who is Heramba, Sambhara, Shambhu, who has pendulous ears, who is very strong, who is gladdening, who grants prosperity, who is ferocious, who roars like a cloud, who is conqueror of the host, Vinayaka, Virupaksha, a lord who is brave, a boon giver, who is the great lord of the entire army of Shiva, who is the intellect, who is perfection, who gratifies quickly, who is liked by the Rudras, who is overseer of hosts, who is Uma's son, a destroyer of evil, who is Kartikeya's elder brother, Ishana's son, with a vehicle of rat, loved by perfected ones, Lord of the perfected, perfected one amongst the perfected, Vinayaka, who is unimpeded, who is Tumburu, who has lion for his vehicle, loved by seductive women, scratched on the hip, who is a prince, who is a descendant of Shakala, who is appeased, who is immeasurable, who is the origin of hymns invoked by Kushmandas, who is invincible, who conquers easily, who is victory, who is Lord of the earth, Lord of the worlds, Lord of the creature, who is undecaying, who is the maker of the universe, the destroyer of the universe, who has the form of the universe, who is the receptacle, who glows, who is a poet, who is a bull of poets, the lord of the poets, who is conducive to the Brahmins, who is beloved of those who know Brahma, who is the eldest king, the lord of treasures, lord of those who like wealth, who is liked, who exists within the city of gold, who exists in the midst of sun's disk, who has scattered the waters of the ocean by striking his tongue, who split Push. 1 minute. Here, Pushna means Surya, Aditya. Basically, during the Daksha Brahma, when Uma has decided to give up her life. So at that time, when Shiva with his anger, he was spoiling the entire Dakshayagna. At that time, Surya was opposing the Shiva's army. So at that time, Ganesha went there and he broke the teeth of Shiva, Surya, and told him that going to a place where Shiva is not respected is certainly an unacceptable thing. So that is what exactly is the mistake of Daksha. So at that time, he broke the teeth of Surya. So Surya here is named as Pusha, who grew up playing on Uma's body. Means he was playing in the lap of his mother Uma, who grants liberation and preserves the lineage, who wears a coronet, who wears earrings, who has a garland of pearls, who wears a garland of flowers, who consists of of the mind, who destroys the prosperity of demons by averting his face, who overcomes the earth with the gait of his foot, who is very young, whose girdle is made of manja grass and gold, who removes bad omens, who removes bad dreams, who pacifies, who is endowed with good qualities, who is established in sounds, who is handsome, who resides in everyone's eyes, who wears shining anklets, who wears yellow clothes, who carries a sword, who resides in the month of April to May when the moon is not full, who has a who has dark teeth, who has a bright colored body, who has the moon on his forehead, whose arms are oblations, who is the overlord of the yoginis, who is in the eye, who is the man, who has elephant's ears, who is the great king of horse, who is victory, who is firm, who is lord of elephants, who has a banner, who is God of gods, who is Kama's life, he actually make Kama to regain his life, who is a lamb, who controls the air, who is learned, who is a boon giver, whose royers split clouds in the large sky, who has boar's teeth, who conquers death, who is clothed in a tiger's skin, whose being is power and desire, who is the savior of gods, who is the crusher of demons, who was born from Shambhu's mouth, who was born from Shambhu's anger, who causes Shambhu's laughter, who possesses Shambhu's fiery energy, who removes Shiva's grief, who causes happiness to Gauri, who was born from the impurity on Uma's body, who has a person's body, who makes a great roar, whose body is a mountain, who has a beautiful face, who is the self of everything, who is the self of all the gods. That means he is Atma of everybody, Atma of all the gods, who has Brahma's head, who is the Lord of regions, who acquires the part which is Brahma's egg. Means he acquires the Brahmanda, who has the shining heaven on his forehead, whose hair is truth. The opening and shutting of those eyes is the birth and death of the universe. Means by simply opening and shutting his eye, that one in 1 minute form is equivalent to the creation and complete dissolution of the whole universe, whose three eyes are the moon, the sun, and fire, whose single task is the Lord of the mountain, who is righteousness, who is strengthened by the Samaveda mantras or Sama hymns, whose teeth are the Pleiades and the planets, who has a voice and a tongue, whose nose is Indra, who has a necklace in the midst of his brow, who delights in astrology, whose shoulder is the Kula mountain, Kula Parvata, whose bells are the sun and the moon, who has Rudra's head, whose arms are the male and female rivers, Nada and Nadi, whose fingers are snakes, whose nails are the stars, whose hip is the earth, whose penis is embraced, who is a mountain, whose knees are inferior to those of Rudra, whose buttocks are the hell, that's where the hell resides, whose feet is the sages, whose thumb is time, whose body is the three Vedas, whose finger is the stellar spear, who is motionless because of the fire in his heart, whose home is the lotus pericarp in the heart, who has the sky as a lake for sports, whose chain, who- elephant's heel chain is meditation for true devotees, whose restraining rope is the act of worship, who is majestic, who is Kashyapa, who is a ruler, who is an astrologer, who is sluggish, who is powerful, who is renowned, who is lawful, who is a conqueror, who is a Pramatha, who is Lord of all the Pramathas, who is the third jewel, Chintamani, the Lord of wealth, whose home is in the forest of wishing trees, Kalpavrikshas, who stands in a circle of jewels, who rests on a jeweled lion throne, who rests his foot on the head of Tivra. Tivra is one of the Shakti Devata who always resides at his feet, who is caressed by Jolini's head. Here, Tivra, Jolini, all these are different Shakti Devatas, the sources of energy which resides in him. In fact, the different names finally gives us the vision of the entire world. Since Ganesha is the form of, is basically a visible form of the invisible or the one who is formless, Parabrahma. So, because of that reason, Ganesha includes everything that exists in the universe. So, Tivra, Jolini are some of the Shakti Devatas. Continuing, the splendor of whose seat is blessed by Nanda. That means that Nanda Shakti is at his seat, whose seat was decorated by Bhogini, whose seat is Kamadayini, who rests on a seat supported by the glittering Ugra, whom the gem in his head is called Tejovati, who is garlanded with the goddesses Satya and Nitya, and all these are the different Shakti Devatas which form the body of Ganesha, whose seat is a remover of obstacles, who rests on a lotus which has the form of all the Shaktis, who assumes the lotus position on a syllable, who rests in the three holes which contain the sacred fire, who has the tip of his toe bent upwards, whose ankle is not prominent, whose heels are covered, whose buttocks are fat, whose knees are joined together, whose thighs are thick, whose hips are upraised, whose navel is deep, whose stomach is gross, whose chest is corpulent, whose arms are huge, whose shoulders are corpulent, whose neck is like a conch shell, who has a large underlip and a long nose, whose left tongue whose left tusk is broken, whose right tusk is raised high, who has a huge jaw, who has three small eyes, who has flapping ears, who has a firm head, the top of whose frontal prominence is like a bunch of flowers, whose diadem, the crown, is a jewel, who is independent, whose waistband and necklace consists of snake, whose sacred thread is a snake, whose hair ring is a snake, whose armlets and neck chains are snakes, whose girdle and belly ties are also snakes. He is decorated everywhere with the snakes like Shiva, whose upper garment is the king of snakes, who is red, who wears red garments, who is adorned with red garland, whose eyes are red, whose hands are red, whose palate is red, whose lips are like tender leaves, who is white, who wears white clothes, who is adorned with a white garland, whose splendid umbrella is also white, who is fanned with a white chowri, all of whose limbs are flawless, who is endowed with all characteristics, who is opulent with all kinds of ornaments and decorations, who possesses absolute splendor, who confers happiness on all those who are auspicious, who is the cause of all causes, whose unique tongue gives all things, who is an archer, who is filled with seeds, who bears a club, whose body is white, who makes beings auspicious, who has a fine sacred thread, whose lineage prospers, who wears a crown, who wears a earrings, who wears a necklace, who wears a garland of wild flowers, who has auspicious arm bracelets, who holds a bow made from sugar cane, who has a pike, who has a discus in his hand, who carves a lotus, who holds a nose, who has a blue lotus, who holds rice husks, who holds flower buds, who holds his own tusks, who holds a creeper that grants all desires, whose unique tongue gives security to everyone, who is independent, who holds a string of rosary beads, who possesses the knowledge of hand gestures, who has a mallet as a weapon, whose part is the earth, who holds a conch, who causes delightful to swarms of bees, who holds an orange, who carries a mango bud, who has an egg, who showers multitudes of gems from the pot of gold on his trunk, who is lord of the beautiful lady of speech, Saraswati, who is fond of playing with king of birds, Garuda, who loves Mahalakshmi, who is enchanted by Siddhalakshmi, whose upper body is Rama, and the lord of Rama, whose lower body is Maheshwara and Uma, the left half of whose body is the earth and the boar, the hind part of whose body is Rati and Kandarpa, who creates fragrance and pleasure, who gives pleasure to joyful people, who increases the wealth and prosperity of those whose great fortune has already prospered, whose task is happiness and cheerfulness, who is a repository of abundant beauty, at whose feet Madanavati rests, whose task is both pleasant and unpleasant, who is a shelter for those who have even the slightest difficulties, who always flows with a car when sexually aroused, whose docile feet removes obstacles, who possesses the power called Dravini, whose tranquil eye is Tivra, whose one eye is cherished by Jwalini, who attracts Mohini, who is adorned with the beauty of Bhogadayini, the beauty of whose face is like the beauty of Kamini. One of those eyes was settled on Tejini, who has passion for wealth, who roars, who is lord of the treasure called Mahashankha, at whose stooped head Vasumati bows, who is the lord of great southern elephants, who must be served by all the gods and teachers, who resides in the heart of three sacred fires, who is Ishana's head, whose tuft of hair is the lord of demons, who is Vayu's son, whose eyes is not fierce, who is celestial, who possesses divine weapons, whose body has 100 joints, who is fond of choosing the elephant such as Airavata and so on, who stand at the 10 directions, who has a scabbard which holds weapons such as thunderbolt, who is powerful supporter of the entire army of Devas, whose retinue is victory and defeat, who brings about victory and defeat, whose lotus feet are worshipped by those who are victorious, who is garlanded with the eternal and the transitory, who is perfectly radiant of Vilasini, who is ornamented with Chaundi's beauty, who gives eternal happiness to Shesha, who confers auspicious things unto auspicious people, who sustains rights, the sacrifice, and knowledge, who is served by those who have desires, whose feet rests on Subhaga, who is the refuge of the beautiful Lalita, who protects Kamini, who is desire, who enjoys sporting with Kamini, who is the refuge of Saraswati, who is Gauri's son, who is the mansion of prosperity, whose feet are concealed by teachers, who is accomplished in speech, who is the husband of the goddess of speech, who is Malini's lover, who is Rama, who is the eldest brother of Vamana. Here, basically, every form, every known form like Rama, Krishna, everything is considered to be Gajanana, who is captivating, whose lotus feet are embossed with garlands of pearls, whose initial syllable is whose power is prominent, who protects and creates the universe, etc., who has a feminine consort called Swaha, who possesses the Ved syllable, who has made his abode in the ocean of immortal nectar, whose eyes are rolling about because of immortal nectar, whose eyes are rolling about because of alcohol, who that's basically Madira or Soma, who calculates the remains of what is left. Ganesha, the Lord of hosts, who is absolute perfection at all times, who is to be worshipped always, who is naked Digambara, who is deathless Mrityunjaya, whose vision is without end, who is immeasurable, who is immortal, who does not suffer from old age, who is pure, who is indestructible, who is imperishable, who is the immortal and the undecaying, who is unknowable by reason, who is undecaying, who is unconquerable, who is independent, who is salubrious, who is pure, whose perfection is immeasurable, who is not dual, who is friendly, whose mind is immeasurable, who is without shape, who is a smokeless fire, who destroys strength, whose characteristics are unmanifested, who supports the pittas, who is a support, who supports the Pitru Devatas, who is a support, who does not need a support for himself, who has a rat on his flag, who fulfills desires, whose Lord chariot is a rat, whose perfection is without guile, who is non dual, who is immeasurable, whose face is immeasurable, who stands in the midst of an ocean of sugarcane, who eats sugarcane with milk, whose splendor surpasses that of the god of love, whose splendor is equal to that of Indra's bow, whose splendor is similar to that of Indragopa beetle, whose luster is that of a sapphire, who is dark like the petal of Indivara, who is adorned with the disk of the moon, who is loved by fuel, the energy, who shares the Ida libation, whose name is Ida libation, loved by Indra, who destroys obstacles for the Ikshvakus, one of the well-known dynasty of the belonging to the solar dynasty, who is desired by the parts of the ritual, who has Ishana's head, who is Ishana himself, who is loved by Ishana, his father, who destroys plagues, who is the destroyer of the three desires, who is devoid of even an atom of desire, who himself is Vishnu, who has the digit of the moon on his forehead, the Chandra, who likes moonbeams, whose face is uplifted, who is lofty, who is the foremost of the noble 30 gods, who is vigorous, whose body is blazing, who is beyond inference and arguments, whose eyes are the Rig Veda, Yajurveda, and Samavedas, who gives success and prosperity, who is easy to obtain by one whose clear mind is intent, who frees one from the three debts, who has here three debts means Sanchita karma, Prarabdha karma and Adi karma, Adi Daivika karma. Likewise, it goes. The something that we have done in our past life, something that we are doing now, and something that we have done without our knowledge. So he clears all those debts. Who has destroyed obstacles for good devotees? Who has destroyed the power of God's enemies? Who has destroyed the prosperity of those who are indifferent to his worship? Who destroys boils and skin diseases, who stands on a seat which is a round stool, who has adopted the posture of standing on one foot, who upsets the prosperity of Daityas, who shelters all from agitation, who is the repository of the lordly powers, who is sovereignty, who grants wishes to those belonging to this world and the other world, whose blink is identical with the light of sheet lightning, whose face resembles that of Airavata, who should be called the syllable Om, who is the syllable Om himself being the Parabrahma, who has vitality, who is Lord of plants, who is the repository of nobility, who has forbearance towards arrogance, whose sound is loud, who is god of the celestial elephants, who exist in the demon's god, who is proclaimed in all the phonemes ending with visargas, including ah, who holds who holds a water pot, who is a kalpa, who wears braided and knotted hair, whose face is that of young elephant, who is the witness of action, who is the success of actions, who gives the results of good and bad karmas, whose shape is round like that of the blossoms of the Kadamba tree, who is leader of the Kushmanda army, whose body is compassion, who is reddish, who is narrator, who wears the girdle around his hips, who is crippled, who loves those who are crippled, who stands in a hole dug by swords, who is pure like the sky, who is bald, who resides in tusks, who has the Patwanga club in his hand, who is as difficult as the sky to seize, who is opulent with good qualities, who is impenetrable bliss, whose prose and verse is an ocean of immortality, who loves singing and prose, who roars, who is song, who was born before the god of love, who is intent upon secret conduct, who himself is the secret, who is described in the secret text, whose abode is a secret, who is an ocean of molasses, who is accessible through a teacher, who is the teacher's teachers, he is the guru of all the gurus, who is garlanded with small and large bells, whose frontal lobes are like cards, who is spot bellied, who is called the letter N, who is the letter N himself, whose trunk is the shape of the letter N, who is passionate, who is Shiva's friend. Let me just go back for a small mistake that has happened. He is who is called the letter Nga. Nga is basically in Sanskrit, we say ka, ka, ga, gha, nga. So, who is called Nga? Who is the letter Nga? Whose trunk is the shape of the letter Nga? If you observe the name Gajanana or Gananayaka, all of them have they begin with that particular letter Nga. It's little difficult to pronounce unless you are well versed with the Indian letters. Who is passionate, who is Shiva's friend, who is the Lord of Chanda, who is a fierce valor, who is father of moving and unmoving, who is the thought jewel Chintamani, who is eager for solid food, who is the sacred text, who consists of sacred texts, who can only be described with difficulty in the sacred text, whose body is the sacred text, who is the origin of the universe, who is the witness of the universe, who is victory, who is defeat, who is complete victory, who is the Lord of the lion throne in the sense of the tongue, whose splendor shines with his ears flapped, on whom swarms of bees do the humming, whose howlings makes a loud uproar, whose jeweled anklets clang, who is named the final syllable and visarga, who gives great success for every mantra, whose bald head is a drum, who is the lord of the female demons, who loves the dindy drums, who is gladdened by the sound of the large drum, who is Danka, who is Ganesha as Dundi, who can be named by the syllable Nga. Again, there is a small miss in the spelling. Who is gladdened by the sound of the large drum, which is called as Damaru? Who is Ganesha as Dundi? Who can be named by the syllable Nga? Who is the Lord of speech? Who is the soul of universe? Who is the creator of the universe? Who is the material principles? Who is the material principle called Prakriti, whose material principle can be described in words, who rests with an eyeball, who is the rescuer, who is Taraka's killer, who is Stanu, who is loved by Stanu. Stanu basically refers to Shiva. Who is the establisher? Who is that whatever is moving and that which is stationary? Here, that which is moving is the living beings like all the animals, and that which is stationary is basically the trees and the mountains. Who is the extinguisher of Daksha's Yajna? Who is the giver, who is generous, who is the origin of compassion, who is compassionate, who possesses a celestial power, who carries a staff, who is leader of the army, who has shattered the garland of clouds into pieces with his tusk, who restrains the demon's elephants, whose elephant's part clings to his tusk, who subdues the god's enemies, who possesses self control, who is wealth, who is Kubera himself, the treasurer of all the gods, who is kinsman, who gives wealth, who holds up the earth, who becomes manifest only through meditation, who should be meditated upon, who is the object of meditation, who is engrossed in meditation, who is the primordial sound sit, whose fiddle contains a row of created universes, who should be described loudly, who loves loud sounds, who is sound, who is situated in sound, who is complete, who is pure, who is perpetual, who is both perpetual and impermanent, who is healthy, who is the highest heaven, who is the supreme abode, who is the supreme self, who is the highest refuge, who is higher than the high, who is Pashupati himself, which basically mean Lord of the beasts, who frees the soul from fetters, who is full of bliss, who is the highest bliss, who is the primordial supreme person, whose face is a clear lotus, who destroys the ignorance of those who are humble, who is beyond analysis and proof, who removes the injuries of the humble, who has a snake in his hand, who is lord of snakes, who hisses like a serpent, who likes sugarcane, whose pair of feet is worshipped by Bana, who plays with children, who is curious, who is Brahma himself, whose feet are worshipped by Brahma, it is Chaturmukha Brahma who creates the world, who is a Brahminical student, who is Brihaspati, the Guru of all the Devas, who is the largest, who is intent upon Brahma, who is friendly to the Brahmins, who is loved by those who know Brahma. This is Parabrahma, one which covers, which is the form of, which is the nectar or the essence of the entire world, who gives prosperity with a glance, who is auspicious, who is splendor, who removes fear, who is the illustrious one, who is easy to obtain through devotion, who gives wealth, who increases wealth, who is the future, whose abode is the past, who gives that what is pleasant, who is to be meditated upon from the spot between the eyebrows, who is the mantra, who is the lord of mantras, who possesses a mantra, who is intoxicated when in rut, whose rut is massive, whose tusk is the supreme lord in Mekhala, whose eyes appears to be heavy when he is in rut, who is very strong, who has great courage, who has great vitality, who is magnanimous, who is the sacrifice, the yajna, who is the Lord of the sacrifice, Lord of the yajnas, who is protector of the yajna, who is who gives the results of the yajna, who is Lord of the yajna, who is accessible by yoga, who is Lord of cows, who is loved by beggars, who is flavor, who loves flavors, who should be enjoyed, who gives amusement, who is loved by Ravana, who protects kingdoms, who king contains jewels, who gives happiness to kingdoms, who is a goal, who gives lakhs of wealth, who can be defined, who exists during the destruction, the one cannot be destructed. So, when Shankara performs the destruction of the whole universe, what remains at the end is only Gajanana, who loves sweet meats, who likes elephant stables, who is obsessed with dancing, who causes gain, who is famed amongst all the beings, who is the best, whose mouth is fire, who should be praised, who is accessible through the Upanishads, who is the slaughterer, who has eyes everywhere, who is the ordainer, who has mouths everywhere, who is the pleasant God, who is the leader of everything, who restrains the thunderbolts of the thunderbolt wielders, who is Vishwaswat kinsman, who is the support of everything, who is Lord of, I'm sorry, who is Vivaswat kinsman, who is the support of everything, who is Lord of everything, who is the Lord, who is the sound Brahma, who can be attained through equanimity, who is the Lord of Shambhu and all the army of Devas, who is garlanded with the flowers of 6 seasons, who is the 6 supports, who is the 6 syllables, who is a doctor in respect of samsara, who is omniscient, who is the healer of all healers, who is playing when he is destroying, preserving, and creating, who destroys a bed of arrows, whose great frontal prominence is reddened, who imparts discrimination between good and evil, who is the witness, who churns the ocean, who is intelligible to himself, who has gifts, who is independent, whose wishes are the truth, who is devoted to the chanting of the Samaveda, who is happy, who is the goose, who is lord of elephant demons, who is the oblation, who eats oblations made to the gods and ancestors, to whom sacrifices should be offered, who is static, who is in the midst of the mantra having the syllable hum, hum, who is overlord of the sacred places, who is earth's husband, whose highest obsession is patience, who quickly confers peace, who finds happiness in peace, who is the divine tree on the earth, who gives accomplishment in the law, who gives accomplishment in power, who gives accomplishment in the sensuous, who increases good fortune, who gives knowledge, who gives power, who gives the fruits of liberation and carnal enjoyments as results, who confers what is pleasing, who is a hero, who gives prosperity, who gives victory, who subdues everyone, who destroys faulty embryos, who gives sons and grandsons, who removes Lakshmi's sorrow, who destroys misfortune, who supports all the powers, who paralyzes the mouth of opponents, who clarifies disturbed minds, who neutralizes an enemy's evil spells, who removes distress, who gives liberation from bonds, who is a moment, who is half a second, who is a minute, which is a period of time, who is 40 seconds, who is 2 seconds, who is a blink, who is a very rapid blink, who is an instant, who is rapid 24 minutes. That means all different forms of the time. Who is a period of 48 minutes, who is 3 hours, who is the day, who is the night, who is a period of day and night, who is a fortnight, who is a month, who is a half year, who is a year, who is 12,000 divine years, who is 36,000 divine years, who is the period of great destruction, who is a sign of zodiac, who is a fixed star Dhruva, who is the lunar day, who is the lunar period of 2.5 hours, who is the turn of the day, who is an astrological division of the day, who is a quarter part of the lunar mansion, who is the first astrological house, who is half of a zodiacal sign, who is the wheel of time, who is Mount Meru, who is seven stars of Ursa Major, who is the pole star, who is eclipse, who is Saturn, who is Venus, who is Jupiter. He himself is Mercury, Mars, Moon, and the Sun. And he is the responsible for all the destruction, creation, and the stability or maintaining of this world. He is everything which is unwilling and moving. He is earth, he is air, he is fire, he is heavens, he is individuality, he is primordial matter, he is masculine principle, he is Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Rudra, Indra, Shakti, Sadashiva, and he is 30 gods who is the deceased ancestors, basically the Pitra Devatas, who is the perfected ones, who is the Yakshas, who is the Rakshasas, who is the Kinnaras, who is the accomplished ones, who is the Vidyadharas, who is the ghosts, humans, animals, and birds, who is the oceans, who is the rivers, who is the mountains, who is the origin of past, present, and future, who is Sankhya, who is Patanjala Yoga, who is all the Puranas, who is the Vedas, who is also the non Vedic literature, who is the limbs of the Vedas, who is a good conduct, who is Mimamsa, who is Nyaya, who is Ayurveda, who is the Veda of archery, who is music, who is drama and dance, who is follower of Vikhanas, who is the follower of Bhagavatas. So, here by mentioning these things in the world, you cannot consider anything as inferior or superior because everything, whether it is dance or music or Ayurveda or Veda, everything is nothing else but Ganesha himself. So, everything need to be treated with an equality. Who is follower of Pancharatra? This is another way, another uh, concept or another spiritual aspects. Who is a follower of Shiva? Who is a follower of Pashupati? Who is a Kalamukha? Who is the instructions pertaining to Bhairava? Who is a follower of Shakti? Who is a follower of Ganesha himself? Who is the follower of Surya? Who is a follower of Jains, who is the sacred text of Jain saints. So here, whether it is a Jainas or the Sauras or Ganapatyas or Shaktas or Kalamukhas or Shaivas or Vaishnavas, The all are basically nothing other than Gajanana. Who is the sensible and the insensible, who is bondage, who is liberation, who is happiness, who is carnal enjoyment. So even the carnal enjoyments are Ganesha himself. So you cannot even look down upon anything in this world. You need to treat everything with an equality. Who is yoga, who is earth, who is small, who is large, who is the term of salutation? Who is the sound hum? Who is the sound fat? Who is the benediction swadha? Who is the benediction swaha? Swaha and swadha are something that is used at the end of the mantras. Swaha, with the swaha, the benefit will go to the devas. With the swadha, the benefit will go to the pitrudevatas. Who is the ritual exclamation Shaushat? Who is the ritual exclamation Vaushat? Who is the ritual exclamation Namaha? Who is intuitive knowledge? Who is discriminating knowledge? Who is bliss? Who is understanding? Who is consciousness? Who is equanimity? Who is restraint? Who is unique? Who is the support of single syllable? Who is engrossed in the syllable Om? Whose mind is fixed on one object? Who is a unique hero? Whose real appearance is one and many? Who has two forms? Who has two arms? Who has two eyes? Who has two tusks? Who protects islands? Who has two mothers? Dvaimatura. Who has two faces, who is non dual, who is beyond duality, who is sun, moon, and fire, who produces the three worlds, who is the three fires, who gives the results of following of three paths, whose own self is the trigunas, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamo gunas, who is the origin of the triple world, the Sarga, heaven, and the Bhuloka in which we are living, and Patala Loka, which may also be a hell. So he is the origin of all this triple world. Who is the Lord of three powers, who has three eyes, who has four arms, who has four tusks, who represents the four souls, who has four faces, whose stratagems are of four kinds, who resides in the four social classes and the four stations of life, who practices the four kinds of speech, who is the instigator of change, who is delighted with the ritual of the fourth, that is Chaturtha, Ganesha Chaturthi, Vinayaka Chaturthi, likewise, who is the origin of the day called the Chaturtha, the fourth, who you are the five syllables, who has five forms, who has five faces, who possesses the five best accomplishments, who is the five supports, who is the five colors, who is intent upon the five syllable, who is five talas high. It's basically one tala is a tala vriksha, tala tree. So his height is that of the five tala trees. Who is 1.5 feet high? Who is the vowel of the five ohms? Whose sudden appearance consists of five Brahmas? Who is surrounded by five subordinate deities? Who likes the five foods? Who is the god of love? Who is himself the five Shivas? Whose stool has six corners? Who dwells in the six chakras of the body? Who splits the six knots? Who destroys the darkness over the six limbs? Whose navel is 6 finger breadths in depth? Who has six faces? Who is the brother of six faced Skanda? Who is surrounded by six Shaktis? Who destroys the six hostile groups? Who destroys the fear of the six waves of existence? Who is beyond the six systems of philosophy? who performs the six activities of a Brahmin, who possesses the six qualities, who resides in the six flavors, whose feet are the seven underworlds, the circumference of those eyes are the seven islands, Saptadvipa Vasundhara, whose diadem is the seven heavenly worlds, Bhu, Bhuvaha, Suvaha. Likewise, there are seven worlds above us. Who gives gifts to Surya? Who gives happiness to the kingdom with its seven limbs? Who is prized by the hosts of seven sages? Who is the repository of 7 meters? Who has seven sacrificial priests? That is yagnas, who resides in the seven musical notes, Saptaswara, Sa, Ri, Ga, Ma, Padani, Padani, likewise the seven notes of the music, who has the seven oceans as the basis of his playful activity, who is served by the seven mothers, who experiences rapture through his enjoyment of 7 meters, who is the 7 meter himself, who is the Lord of the Yagna, whose image should be meditated on in the form of 8 different images, who is the cause of 8 primary elements of creation, from whom arises the fruit of 8 limbed yoga, whose seat is on the lotus which has 8 petals, whose splendor is equal to that of 8 Shaktis, who strengthens the 8 sovereign powers, whose splendor consists of 8 sacred seats and the lesser seats, who is protected by 8 mothers, who is seated on a seat consisting of 9 snakes, who rules over the 9 treasures, who returns to the city of 9 doors, whose mansion is supported on 9 pillars, who is eulogized by the 9 Narayanas, who is served by the 9 Durgas, who is the great Lord of the 9 Lords, who is ornamented with 9 snakes, whose body is adorned with 9 jewels, who is supported on the head of the 9 Shaktis, whose being is tenfold, who has 10 arms, who is praised by the 10 lords of the world, who consists of 10 chapters, who has the 10 vital breaths, who possesses restraint over the 10 organs, whose great mantra has 10 syllables, whose body pervades the 10 regions, who is eulogized by the 11 great Rudras, who possesses the 11 syllables, who is 12 very strong, who has 12 very strong arms, whose mansion is on the chakra that lies on the forehead, whose different parts have 13 designations, who is the presiding deity of all the gods, who gives boons to the 14 Indras, who is the lord of 14 Manus, who is the richly endowed with 14 primordial knowledges, who is the lord of 14 worlds, who is the 15 kinds of Sama hymns, who is clear like the moon, who, when it has 15 digits, that is 15 days, whose abode has 16 supporters, who is the syllable of 16 vowels, who resides in the 17 digits of the moon, who is the 16 principal vowels, who is the 17 tantric acts, who is the 17 syllables, who is lord of 18 islands, who composes the 18 Puranas, who creates 18 herbs, who has recollected the 18 forms, who creates the 18 forms of writing, who creates the 18 heterogeneous cash, who is the 21st man, who has 25 fingers in the form of young leaves, whose self is the 24 material principles, who is the Purusha, who is the 25th part, who is Lord of 27 stars, who causes the 27 junctions, who is overlord of the 32 fierce forms of Shiva, who is the 34 deep pools, who is the source of 36 material principles, whose body is 38 digits, who is not impeded by the group of 49 bowing maruts, who is the series of 50 syllables, whose body consists of 50 Rudras, who is Lord of 50 Shaktis of Vishnu, who is part of 50 syllables, who is the series of 52 elephants, who resides in 63 syllables, who introduces the 64 syllables, who is the repository of 64 arts, who is praised by the group of 64 perfected yoginis, who is manifest in the 68 great sacred foods and sacred places of Bhairava, who is himself the sacred places of Bhairava, who is himself the 94 mantras, who is Lord of divinities, who number more than 96, who is the bliss of 100, who is the support of 100, whose eyes are as broad as the 100 lotuses, who has 100 armies, who has 100 for support, who has 100 very sharp weapons, whose abode is on a lotus, who is ornamented with Shesha, who is the Purusha of 1,000 heads, who has 1,000 eyes, who has a 1,000 feet, who should be eulogized with the 1,000 names, who removes the strength of Indra, who has made his seat on the kings of serpents, who has 1,000 hoods, whose eulogy is recited by the 88,000 primordial great sages, who is the support of lakhs of wealth, who has enjoyed 4 lakhs of recitation, who expounds the 4 lakhs of verses in the Puranas, whose life resides in the 84 lakhs of beings, who resembles a myriad of suns, who is as pure as beams from myriad moons, who is leader of myriads of followers of Vinayaka, who are controlled by Shiva and Parvati, whose limbs are splendid through being charmed by 7 myriads of great mantras, to the impression of those feet, the rows of 33 myriads of God bow, who is the friend of endless numbers of Shaktis, who is eulogized by endless number of sages, who has endless prosperity in his endless names, who himself is endless, who gives endless happiness, who is served by the eternal gods, who is praised by the endless number of mouths, who in this way have the 1,000 names of Ganesha, then declared. The man who recites this daily at hours sacred to Brahma, that is early in the morning around 3:30 or 4 o'clock, between that time is called as that hour which is sacred to Brahma, called as Brahmi Muhurta. He will have in his grasp all the rewards which pertain to this and the other world. Long life, good health, lordly power, patience, heroism, strength, renown, intelligence, wisdom, fortitude, beauty, good fortune, handsomeness, truth, compassion, forbearance, tranquility, dexterity, positive disposition towards the law, control of the world, conversation with everyone, sharpness in speech, erudition in the assembly, magnanimity, profundity, holy splendor, strength, fiery energy, a good family, conduct, splendor, courage, honor, intuitive knowledge, discriminating knowledge, belief in existence, stability, trustworthiness, prosperity in wealth, gain, etc. These will occur immediately as a consequence of its recitation. A king, a queen, a prince, and a minister, by reciting it, attain the power to subject utterly a person to their will in four different ways. But whoever recites it for the purpose of subjecting a person to his own will, he becomes a slave. Effortlessly, it gives accomplishment in the law, power, and sensuousness and liberation. It removes fear of possession by yakshas, rakshasas, Durga's attendants, and the female demons, reduces happiness in the empire, and utterly crushes the arrogance of rivals. It fosters the seed of friendship, which has been consumed and destroyed by any quarrels. It calms the effects of bad dreams and soothes the mind of an angry husband. It gives knowledge of the three time periods, the eight perfections, and the six activities, as well as bringing about the cessation of an enemy's black magic and crushing enemies' armies. On the field of battle, it alone brings victory for everyone. It destroys the blemish of barrenness for all, and it is the sole cause of protection of embryos. This eulogy of Ganesha is to be recited daily, but not in a place where there is a famine, plagues, or dangers. The house where this eulogy is recited will be prosperous, and there will be a decrease in leprosy, urinary diseases, hemorrhages, diseases of the anus, indigestion, abdominal swelling, diseases of the spleen, gallstones, dysentery, distension of the belly, coughing, respiratory problems, intestinal wind, colic, diseases arising from morbid swelling, etc. Headache, vomiting, inflammation of the neck glands, loss of appetite, fever produced by wind, the bowels, or phlegm. From two of these are from disorders of all three, and those diseases which arise from accidental misfortune, cold and heat, whose those which those who lost which last for one day or more, those which are known and even unknown, those which arises from disorders of bodily fluids. The recitation of that eulogy terminates them all immediately. The women, Shudras, and degraded people immediately gain perfection by reciting it. So there is no restriction that who can recite this, who cannot. Because here itself it clearly says, whereas in many other Shastra, there is a restriction that women and Shudras and degraded people are not supposed to sing that. But this Ganesha Sahasranama can be recited by even women, Shudras, and degraded people. Accordingly, this mantra of 1000 names should be recited in order to gain good health. By reciting this eulogy of Mahaganapati, a person filled with desire enjoys all his earthly desires in this world in his chosen manner. Then, in charming celestial sky vehicles, which represents the result of his desires, he wanders as he wishes through the abodes of the moon, Indra, the sun, Vishnu, Brahma, and so on, taking whatever forms he wishes, giving what he wishes, and having the capacity to give what he wishes. Then, after he and selected relatives have enjoyed enjoyments according to their wishes, and after he has become follower of Ganesha, at attendant of Ganesha, is favored by Ganapati. And because he is on the same level as Nandi and Shiva, he is gladdened by all the hosts, and through the kindness of Shiva and Parvati, he is cherished as he were a son. Loved by Shiva, his desires fulfilled because of a boon from Ganesha. He remembers his previous births. That means the person who recite this will remember his previous births and is reborn as a universal king devoted to law. But the person without desire, who is completely engrossed in Ganesha and constantly and devoutly recites this Ganesha Sahasranama, he abides in a state of detachment and intuitive knowledge. Once he has attained the highest yogic accomplishment, now that he has become perpetually without bonds, he is declared to be in supreme bliss, has passed beyond the universe, he is the highest, perfected, and without any rebirth. He dies and always remains joyfully in Vinayaka's dwelling place. This eulogy gives all the lordly powers here and in the next world to all those who mutter, recite, teach, hear, expound, repeat, contemplate, consider, and praise it. Even a person who wanders at will, yet keeps this eulogy in mind, will be protected in battle by 8 myriads of Shiva's army. If the eulogy is written down in a book, it should be honored as if it were a mantra, since the highest good fortune remains in it forever. All the gift giving, all the vows, all the sacred foods, and all the sacrifices never give the instantaneous result coming from this when Ganesha's 1000 names are remembered. The person who constantly recites these 1000 names every day when the sun rises and in the evening and at mid of the day or at all these three times becomes foremost in lordly powers, more powerful in strength, extends his fame substantially, destroys poverty, subdues the universe, and prospers splendidly with sons and grandsons. In addition, a poor person who is single minded, disciplined, and moderate in eating, yet recites this for 4 months while totally engaged in the worship of Ganesha, will obtain great prosperity in the manner laid down by the supreme goddesses, having first completely extirpated poverty in respect of his 7 subsequent births. Whoever constantly recites this entire eulogy of Ganesha will have in his grasp longevity, good health, a family utterly without blemish, wealth for the sick, auspicious fame, pure speech, the beauty of which is natural, good sons, a virtuous wife, and everything else he desires. Conquering the horse, Ganapati, Heramba, Earth Bearer, Mahaganapati, granter of lakhs, quick to favor, unfailingly perfect, immeasurable mantra, hot gem, repository, very auspicious, seed, filler of the directions, boon giver, time, son of Kashyapa, rejoicing, accomplished in speech, Undi, Dundi Vinayaka, a man who has his mind on me, who is concerned with propitiating me. This is what is told by Ganesha himself to Lord Shiva. can eulogize me with these 21 names and who some sweetmeats. Yet I am really eulogized by 1,000 names. Often it may not be possible for us to repeat all the 1,000 names, but instead of that, we can repeat only few of his names, which is the essence of the entire 1,000 names. So let me repeat those names. Their meanings are told before. I'll repeat the names which is in Sanskrit: Ganapa, Ajesha, Heramba, Dvaimatura, Gajanana, Bhalendu, Lambodara, Vinayaka, Parabrahma, Ekadanta, Vignesha, Pila, Nirguna, Siddhida, Ananta. So by repeating these 15 names, it is equivalent to repeating all those 1,000 names. Obeisance, obeisance to him whose feet is the best of God's worship. Obeisance, obeisance to him whose auspicious self is without equal. Obeisance, obeisance to him uniquely perfect with expansive trunk. Obeisance, obeisance to you who has the face of a young elephant. To him whose feet ring with hosts of small bells, who effects the removal of weighty problems of manifesting himself, onto whose cheeks red juices are driven by waves. May he, Ganapati, named king, suppresses all the evils. Thus ends the 46th chapter of Upasana Khanda of the glorious Ganesha Purana, in which Ganesha himself gave the list of 1,000 names. If you observe, these 1,000 names basically formulates different aspects of our life. And if you keep following those things, you will going to see that everything that we come across in our life are all equal in all aspects. There is nothing that is great, there is nothing that is discriminatory, there is nothing that you can look down upon. All human beings, all everything that is existing in this world is nothing else but form of the Gajanana himself. So we need to equally respect everything by considering everything in this world with the equal respect. Now, everything cannot be equal, but by looking at them with an equal respect without any discrimination will make one's mind calm, so that whatever he try to achieve, he will be able to achieve it. Look into any of your new project when you are trying to carry out any new work. If you are having one such kind of a vision where you neither consider anything as something great with a bias or something as looked down upon because of the same bias. So if you don't have any such biases, your work will certainly going to be success with the blessings of Gajanana. Namaste Sharada Devi Kashmira Puravasini Swamaham Prarthaye Nityam Vidya Danancha Dehime. Namaskara. Goodbye.